down at my desk, I would take out my to-do list. By the way, we can talk about later why to-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity. We can get to that. I would sit down at my desk and I would say, okay, I've got that big project that I need to work on right now. Nothing's going to get in my way. I'm going to stay focused. Here I go. I'm going to get started. But first, let me check some email, right? Let me just scroll that Slack channel. Let me just do that one thing on my to-do list, that easy task, just to get started here, just to get the rhythm going, right? It's a work-related task. And what I didn't realize that is the most pernicious form of distraction, the distraction that you don't even realize is happening. Because if it's not what you said you were going to do in advance within your time and attention, it is by definition a distraction. Right? So what we tend to do is we prioritize the easy work. We prioritize the urgent work as opposed to the hard and important work we have to do to move our lives and careers forward. So just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's a distraction. That's the most awful type of distraction. It's not the video games, it's not the social media, it's the distractions we don't even know are distracting us from what we said we would do with our time. So now we've got traction, we've got distraction. Now the other two parts of the model involve what we call triggers. Triggers are these things that prompt us to action. We have two kinds of triggers. External triggers are things in our outside environment. These are things that we tend to blame, like cell phones and our computers and all the pings, dings, and rings in our life. But studies find that those account for only 10% of our distractions. Only 10% are caused by these external triggers. So what's the other 90%? 90% of the time that we get distracted, it's not because of what's happening outside of us, it's because of what's happening inside of us. These are called internal triggers. Internal triggers are these uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. And so that's the first step to becoming indistractable, and answers your question around why, by and large, even though despite knowing what to do, we don't do it, it's because all of these problems are an emotion regulation problem. That in fact, time management is pain management. I would argue weight management is pain management. Money management is pain management. In fact, all human behavior is about a desire to escape discomfort. And that answers your question around why don't we just do what we say we're going to do? Because we don't realize that these are always emotion regulation problems. So that's the first step to becoming indistractable, is mastering the internal triggers. Then the second step, we talked about traction earlier, making time for traction. The third step, hacking back the external triggers. And then finally, preventing distraction with pacts. And so that's the model, these 4 steps. And then of course we can go in as much depth as you like. But if you understand these 4 fundamental steps, and this is what took me 5 years writing this book, namely because I kept getting distracted, right? I was very distractible myself, and I wrote the book for me, as I mentioned earlier. But it was when I boiled down the hundreds of studies and research, and you can see there's 35 pages of citations in the book. It wasn't until I could kind of solidify this model that I could make it practical enough to change lives. It certainly did mine.
One of the things this podcast has taught me from speaking to all these people across multiple fields is that sometimes we can feel like our body, our wiring is against us, especially as it relates to health, right? So, we know sugar is bad. So why does our brain send us these cravings to go and eat sugar? And in the case of distractions and sort of behavioral psychology, I know instinctively and intuitively that distractions, like hanging out on TikTok for an hour, is bad, but my brain is doing it. What does that tell us about how we should go about adopting behavior change?
Yeah, so that's why it's really about this holistic model. So that's what took me the most time to figure out, was what are the 4 mandatory components of living without regret, of doing what you say you're going to do. So the first step is mastering these internal triggers, figuring out why you feel this way, right? What is that underlying sensation? So if you're trying to avoid that chocolate bar, it might be hunger, or it might not be hunger, right? So I used to be clinically obese, and I'll tell you what, I did not eat to excess because I was hungry.
Good point.
I was eating to excess because I was lonely. I was eating to excess because I was bored.
Good
I was
point.
eating to excess because I felt guilty about how much I had just eaten. It wasn't just about the hunger, right? Very few people who are obese are just hungry all the time. That's not what's going on. It's because we're eating our feelings. That's what's happening. So that's the first step. We have to understand the deeper reason.
How did you understand that?
A lot of work, a lot of figuring out stuff in my life to help me understand that. And I think actually that's where my fascination with what I do today, in terms of it's the same exact reason that we would overdo.
Well, this gentleman makes some really good points. And a lot of the people we find on here that are obese, it's not that they have this sensation for hunger, that they have to eat. It goes a lot deeper than that. It's to relieve loneliness and frustration in their life. Now, people get guilty pleasures from feeling guilty about overeating, and they suddenly feel a real guilt complex about the fact that they just ate a shitload of food. Throw caution to the wind. I'm going to show the world or my body that, you know, I'm going to eat no matter what, no matter how fat I get, no matter how obese I get. And what it really is an indication of, it's not that somebody, the average person does not eat in excess amounts like that to become grossly or clinically obese. And we have a lot of YouTubers that are in that same position. They eat because it's a distraction. They eat because they are lonely, which also accounts for how many shows they put on if they happen to be obese, and their general attitude toward everybody else because they're guilty that they are obese and they're trying to find a blame for that. Nobody's to blame but yourself. So if you are obese, it got so bad you had to have a gastric bypass, there's no outside factors that cause that. You can't blame it on outside factors. It's something that you did to yourself. It's compensation, is what it is. It's a feeling of guilt. It's loneliness. No friends, no girlfriends, perhaps. Bad relationship with the wife or girlfriend. You are consuming mass quantities. It's a way of dealing with your loneliness. And that's why you'll find that most single men who are not very active in a community, a real community outside of social media, are usually the most obese people, goes to say. Now you know the answer to that. Why certain people, it might be YouTubers, it might be people that you know outside of social media, they are grossly obese because they are kind of overcompensating for their loneliness and the misery that they have in their life. It's a way of dealing with your own loneliness. That's your friend. Food. It's not that you're that hungry. That's never really the cause. You're never that hungry. Your stomach could only be full so much. And then your body tells you, I've had enough. But with some people, they continue to shovel food into their mouth as if that food is going to disappear and never be seen again, like it's their last meal. Overcompensating for the misery in their life, and because of the fact that these people are extraordinarily lonely. There you go, folks. Another answer to kind of an interesting question. Why are these people, why are these YouTubers, no names put out here, because we're not going to be talking any troll issues here, but we're going to be very generalized and with observation, perhaps, to know that most of the people who have the biggest mouths on YouTube, the most violent, vicious people, have suffered with weight problems. Thank you for listening. You learned something new.